Kia ora, I'm Nicole. I'm the Wargaming Sorceress, and if you're like me, you probably purchased some colour shift paints or one of the ones from Intensify or any of the other brands that have them. Got them home and created your test swatches or test spoons in my case, and then thought, now what? How do I actually use these? I've spent some time playing around with colour shift paints, and in this video I'm going to share some of the insights I've gained from this experimentation. Before we jump into these tips that I have for using them, let's talk about how these colour shift paints actually work. Colour shift paints are also known as duochrome or trichromes depending on how many colours they shift between, duochrome being 2, trichrome being 3. They have a long history of usage going back from the card painting industry, makeup, and even the fine art before they came into our hobby sphere. These paints work by using pigments that reflect different colours based on the angle the light bounces off a surface. They create an illusion of colours shifting and blending seamlessly across a surface, giving it an interesting and dynamic appearance. So now that we know how they work, let's dive into tip number 1. Consider the model you're going to use colour shifts on. Because they use the way that light reflects off of surfaces, colour shift paints generally look better on more organic shapes and long, smooth curves. Think your Eldar of 40k and the PHR fleet from Drop Fleet Commander. These models will look amazing with colour shift paints because they'll be able to make use of the full colour shift effect, opposed to something like your mechs or androids, anything that is angular like your 40k dreadnoughts. They're not going to be able to make the best use of the colour shift effect. You're generally going to have each surface reflecting one of the colours and you're not going to get that smooth gradient effect. However, you don't want to have too many small curves, as I've found in my experience that they don't look as good on these smaller curves than with the bigger, longer curves. With your model now carefully chosen, let's dive into tip number 2, which is the glossiness of your undercoat. We all know that the bottles generally recommend to use a glossy black undercoat, and that's actually for a good reason. You can see that by changing the glossiness of the surface, it creates a very different effect. A gloss black undercoat gives a very smooth and seamless colour shift, while the matte undercoat gives a very glittery effect. Glossy surfaces, as we know, are very shiny, but from a microscopic perspective, they're also very smooth. This allows the pigments to all lie flat in the same direction so that when the light hits, it all reflects back in the same direction. Compare that to matte surfaces, which are really quite rough, and that means the light is going to scatter and diffuse in different directions, and the pigments are not all going to be perfectly aligned. And that's what gives the very glittery effect. Tip number 3 is you don't have to use a black undercoat. As the new Scale 75 paints have shown, you don't actually have to, as they show them also over a white undercoat. One of my favourite ways to use colour shift paints is to use them over a coloured or metallic undercoat, as this can give a magical item or weapon vibe, which is amazing for RPG or fantasy minis. I've also found for sci-fi, this can give a good effect for reflex or hyperlight armor. Changing the colour of the undercoat is going to affect the way that the colour shift looks. Black is going to give you the strongest and most intense effect, while white is going to give a more pearlescent look. But we don't just have to stop there. If we choose a colour that is already in the colour shifter, it can help us highlight different parts of the colour shift. If If we go for a colour that is close to the main highlight reflect, in this case a teal, you can see it's a more subtle, almost a coloured pearl. Whereas if we choose a colour that is closer to the middle or the other end, such in this case a purple, you can see that it's highlighting the blue reflect and it's giving kind of an airy effect. These 4 beetles all use the same colour shifter, the only difference is the colour of the glossy undercoat. You could even try using a colour that is across the colour wheel from the colours in your colour shift to create a more vibrant and interesting effect. One key thing to note though with using colour shift paints in this way, if in the bottle it looks very dark or heavily tinted, it's not going to work as well as if it was going to dry very light or clear. Colour shift paints naturally have a high visual impact, and so you only need a small amount to really draw the attention to your models. I find that generally small amounts on your models are enough to catch the eye, and that's because colour shifts have 2 properties that do this. They're generally more glossy and are going to naturally draw the eye, and they have the dynamic colour shifting, which is another aspect that humans are very good at drawing to, and that is movement and change. I found that if you use a colour shift that is very contrasting to the rest of your colour scheme, you only need a small amount of it, as it's going to be the centre of attention and it can become overpowering very quickly, such is the case with the spider model that I painted for my partner. If you use a colour that's more subtle and blends in with the rest of the colour scheme like I've done on the Hellbringer drape, you can generally get away with using more of it before it starts to get overwhelming. So you have to be careful about deciding how much colour shift you're going to use on your models, because it can get very overpowering, and that's when it starts to get into looking bad or tacky. From my experience, I've found that when I've used colour shift paints over larger surfaces like I used on the Spires model and my Hellbringer drape, that I lost a bit of definition of some of the shapes. And adding oil wash really helps to bring back these shadows and recesses. I prefer oil washes for this, as you can wipe it off the high areas so you're not tinting it. I found that oil washes are better than acrylic washes, such as your army painters, because when I have used them, they will tint the surface and also will dull the colour shift effect. So when I've done this, I've had to put another coat of the colour shift on top to bring back the effect. And so there we go. There's my 5 tips for making use of colour shift paints and how to make them look good. So what you need to think about is choosing a model that's going to show off the colour effect. Consider how glossy your undercoat is going to be for the effect you want. Try playing around with different coloured undercoats and see how it changes the way it looks. Remember that it's a powerful effect and you only need to use a small amount of it to have a high impact. And lastly, use an oil wash to help bring definition back into the areas. I'd love to know which of these tips was helpful or you found the most interesting. And let me know if there's a way that you like to use colour shift paints or have any tips that I didn't cover in this video. I hope this video has given you some confidence in how to use colour shift paints and make them look good. If you found this video useful, I'd love it if you gave this video a like and consider subscribing to my channel. My goal is to help you feel confident about using colours in the paints that you have to create armies that look amazing on the tabletop. I hope to see you in my next video.